I just wanted to be like super upfront. My conscious biases as a software engineer, I think software first. My love of docs is growing. I joined the Kubernetes SIG-Docs because of the fact that there were areas where I was like, this really needs some improvement. And as someone who has had production software go down and Green has lost money over this, I think this should be covered for somebody else, so they don't. And what I found instead in the community was amazing. So I think software first. I've been running Kubernetes for over a year in production, and most of my job is centered around keeping it alive. So my interest in Kubernetes is way more practical than it is academic. For me, this is not an exercise in seeing what we can do. It's more an exercise in what are we actually capable of doing right now, and is this useful to our business? And then I've been a contributor to SIG-Docs for really only about 7 months, and it's been in my spare time. My day job consumes pretty much 85 to 90% of my available attention. So I know a little bit more about the community than a complete beginner, but by no means am I an expert. I'm learning and I'm growing, but I'm going to do my very best to share with you. So that's my perspective. Now that I know what you guys want to talk about, I think we can definitely move on. I had like 5 areas I was thinking. I was like, okay, there was so much in that title. We could basically take each one, and each one could be a talk in and of itself, but I wanted to focus on those areas. So it sounds like, if I was correct, we want to know a little bit more about 3 and 4 and 5. We want to know about internationalization and using Hugo as a documentation tool, actually doing it in production, and how that works. So I guess I'd just ask really quickly, does everyone here have a somewhat functional knowledge of what, when we say Kubernetes, what that even means? If not, it's totally cool. All right.
I actually don't know.
Okay, perfect. That's awesome. Okay, so then we'll just at least do with that. According to their website, which I pulled from the documentation, it is an open source system for automating deployment, scaling, and management of containerized applications. There's like 80 buzzwords in there. So for the uninitiated, Kubernetes is Greek for the word pilot or helmsman. So basically somebody who's operating a ship. What goes on a ship? Containers. And those containers go somewhere where they can serve people. That's kind of, so if you jump into Kubernetes and you see words that you're like, I have no idea what that means. And is that even English? It's probably not. It's probably a Greek nautical term that somebody has repurposed for something in our community. For example, one very popular container registry tool is key.io, Q-U-A-Y. And I did not know this, but key is a very special kind of the docking area for ships that is along, I believe, parallel to a piece of water and juts out into it. There's a difference between like a quay, a jetty, a wharf, and they ask you these kinds of questions, just so you know. So, and a pier, that was the last one. Okay, so that's what Kubernetes is. Basically, we've reinvented the wheel, and Kubernetes is a data center that you install in a data center. And so instead of treating servers as pets that we have to manage all the time very specifically, and oh no, node 3 went down and we need to go do something about it. Kubernetes essentially treats all of your software as declarative infrastructure. Here is the specification of what my app is. And so I've written you a manifest, that's what it's called. And then you go do anything in your power to make sure that what is reality with respect to all of my servers is what's represented in this manifest. And that's Kubernetes' job. So you say, this is what my application is supposed to look like, and it says, I'm going to make sure that your application looks like that. And it's really nice because it lets ops people like me sleep at night because it's checking for failures about 150 times a second and can rectify those in usually less than 10. And can do it for a stunning amount of servers. This grew out of a project from Google called Borg, and now has become Omega. And that is the tool that runs Gmail. So if you like the reliability of Gmail, you'll love Kubernetes. Cool. Moving right along. OK, what is the Kubernetes community? So Kubernetes is a 53 million line code base. Obviously, no one can have mastery of all of it, especially if you've never looked at Go before, which is the language that Kubernetes is written in. So Kubernetes is split into subgroups called SIGs, special interest groups. So special interest groups are responsible for their particular vertical area of focus across the entire community. We deal with this one particular thing. That one particular thing, in the case of Kubernetes, is that I participate in, I apologize, is SIG-Docs, so documentation for Kubernetes. There are lots of others. Cluster lifecycle, as Radhika mentioned, API management, SIG-Auth, SIG-Node, SIG-Storage. So there's all kinds of different places that you can jump in. And all of them have very open, very clear, this is what we focus on, this is our charter, and then they have open meetings where you can join them. The only real cross-cutting effort that you can see in Kubernetes is probably SIG release. And SIG release is responsible for basically taking all the code that these people from around the world have done and put it into production. So SIG-Docs is essentially, right now where we're at is we have moved past the holy crap, what are we doing stage? And we've moved into Kubernetes is being used in ways that we never dreamed possible, and now we need to really cover those use cases. And so SIG-Docs is by far the most diverse group of contributors on planet Earth because people who have deep, deep technical experience and have worked with Kubernetes since before it was a thing contribute to docs regularly. And people, I call them drive-by contributors, people fixing spelling errors in one-off PRs in our repository are also contributors. And we have every level of experience in between. So managing a community like that takes a fairly coordinated effort, especially for our group. I think that's part of what makes us unique as a SIG. And I love that because it means that we get to experience the most diversity and the most opportunity for inclusion. So a lot of what we do, yes, we discuss documentation, we plan releases, we suggest improvements for user onboarding, we identify and implement ways to get documentation, feedback, and metrics, and we help community contributors get involved with Kubernetes documentation. Sound exciting? Keep listening. In my opinion, yeah. So 55%, this is a very recent statistic like of this week, of commits in Kubernetes come from outside the United States. For a tool that started here, it is now a global effort. And so internationalization became a very imminent and a very prominent need for us very quickly. And we originally ran this site back when Radhika was doing release notes on Jekyll. Who here is familiar with Jekyll? Ish, kinda, okay. Jekyll was definitely made popular because of GitHub Pages. That is the most widely used implementation of it. It is essentially a way of being able to use Markdown and the way that Markdown works in a static site generator. Jekyll is written in Ruby and is a fairly ubiquitous tool for being able to manage documentation. I think one of the really cool things that we've experienced in SIG-Docs is the community collaboration. I'll show you in a second, but I've had like the chance to meet hands-on some of our translators, and it's really cool to see. Zack Corlesson was saying this to me today. He goes, you know, there have been diplomatic struggles in lots of these countries between each other. Like, for example, we have teams from Korea and teams from Japan that both contribute to the same code base, and they help each other out in our particular instance. They give feedback to each other. They assist each other with best practices on Git, merging, branch flows, all of that good stuff. And that's something that, like, traditionally diplomacy has not made it very easy for those countries to be, but in Kubernetes, that's happened. And you kind of see like a microcosm of like, wow, we're actually like all really helping each other move forward. I'm on the SIG-Docs release team for 113, and I work with somebody from Tanzania every night on documentation, which I never thought I would do in a million years, and I definitely plan on going to visit. So diving into Hugo as a tool of being able to manage documentation. Level of experience with Hugo, or have seen Hugo, or are thinking about Hugo? Anybody? Yes, no, maybe, kind of. You have been to gohugo.io or gethugo. Hugo is, for the most part, maintained by this individual named Bjorn Erik Pedersen. He is from Scandinavia, and he is actually the one that helped us migrate our site. He was a contractor for us. So if you're thinking about doing it, get him, since he wrote Hugo. So for the most part, it was an experiment for him because he'd never migrated a website that had the kind of scale and traffic that we did in a somewhat live manner. And we found out just how irritating Hugo's Markdown processor is. So for those of you that don't really know, Markdown is a really nice kind of syntax for being able to format documents, but it has to be turned into HTML because that's what browsers think and love and speak in. Because of that, we have ways of being able to transpile the Markdown files into statically generated HTML files. Jekyll's default Markdown processor is called Cramdown. Cramdown is like a golden retriever. It is extremely helpful. It is man's best friend. It loves everything. It is extremely forgiving. And in our case, we had lots of boo-boos and no-nos in our code base that it was just like, you know what? You tried. Good job. By contrast, Black Friday is the name of Hugo's Markdown processor, and it's more like a Doberman Pinscher. It is extremely strict. You do not get any grace whatsoever, and it will crash and burn and cause lots of very confusing things to happen on your website if you're not careful. So the 4 areas that we saw the most amount of pain in our migration were anytime we had a table, anytime we had a code block, anytime we had an ordered list, and anywhere that the website used CSS. Keep in mind, that's everywhere. And if you think about it, you guys are docs writers. Tables are imperative, code blocks are necessary, and ordered lists are obviously an imperative as well. So it basically broke 60% of the website in one very quick moment. Because Hugo has like an import tool from Jekyll, and it has like lots of really exciting promises with it. The demo is even really cool on the website. It's like Hugo import from Jekyll, and then you specify the directory. And then hell breaks loose. And it doesn't work the way you think it's going to work. So tables, the thing to be really careful with is the fact that the double dash that indicates table header rows must be 3. It has to be triple, or else it will be rejected immediately by Black Friday. I believe Hugo has actually changed. You can change Markdown processors now, I believe. I'm sorry, parsers. So you could use Cramdown if you really wanted to, but Black Friday I've had more interesting things happen with. Code blocks, you must specify the language that the code block is in. So you know the triple backtick and then language that sometimes that you see with code blocks in Markdown? Everyone's like, no. Okay, sorry. Well, that's a thing. And if you don't have the language, it will simply just print everything as one string on one line, and your website will be a mile long. And that's not good. Unfortunately, I don't have any examples of where this literally broke because I guess if I had gone in the Wayback Machine on the Internet Archive, I could have found one. But the last and most irritating one was ordered lists. And that's actually still a known issue and an open bug with the Black Friday Markdown parser. So if you plan on doing breaks in between your ordered lists, so you're going to do 1, 2, and then a code block or some explanation or some note, and then go 3, 4, 5, that will not work. That will not work, and it will irreparably break. Unless something has changed recently, we have had to do a lot of getting around that in the code base. And then lastly, CSS. It was the Sass parser for Markdown in Black Friday, in Hugo, is very picky about how your Sass indentation is. So if you need to stick to either 2 or 4 tabs, 2 spaces, 4 spaces, or tabs for Sass, or else impending doom. It is not as nice as YAML. YAML will guess. If you had 3 spaces, it's like, okay, that was probably an indent and you're fine. But this is not the case with Hugo. So that bit. Okay, now, yes?
Can you give a little more,
Totally.
more context into why you did the migration?
Yes, that's a great, is literally this next slide, internationalization. No, you're good. So here's the reason why we went with Hugo, everybody. Internationalization. There are a lot of things that Hugo does well. Aside from the fact that it's written in Go, which obviously, if you're going to be in Kubernetes, Golang is the default. The important piece to note with how Hugo parses text and does all this thing is with Jekyll, all of your top-level folders are like, if you're going to write out a nav bar, they are like the initial things that you see on the website. With Hugo, everything lives in a subdirectory, the content / and then two-letter language code, and that's default. So internationalization kind of comes by default with Hugo, and that was something that we really liked. You can configure your way out of it, but we just knew that we had more buttons that we could push, and builds were more reliable with our static site generating in Hugo than it was with Jekyll. Because GitHub has those limits when you get scary high traffic on your statically generated websites, we had to move to Netlify as our hosting provider. If you guys haven't heard of them, they're amazing, and they deserve your business if you're going to use Hugo. They have really, really, really generous free tiers, and then kind of they go up from there. But Hugo is really built for like the Netlify community, and we found a lot of help there with generating that. So does that help a little bit with why we picked Hugo? It's, I mean, the biggest reason was I-18N, which I just recently found out means internationalization. They just deleted 18 letters. Yes. Yes, good question. Because Jekyll, oh, sorry, I'll repeat the question for those who are watching. No, you're good. She asked, why did we pick Markdown instead of one of the other supported formats for Hugo's static site generation? Kubernetes had gone from 0.x to 1.8 with Jekyll, and all of it written in Markdown. And our thought process was, we should probably not spend our time trying to teach engineers new tricks with documentation. Just let them use the tools that they were good at using. Every engineer has written a README file, no matter how terrible, even if it's literally just # the title. And you're like, well, this was useful. They have at least seen Markdown. And so that's generally the most ubiquitous tool for the community. Yes? Oh, you look like you're about to. You're just holding the mic. Okay, that's all right. Any other questions? Sorry, let me check time. I want to make sure I'm respectful. 7:38, we're doing great. Hugo has been pretty good to us once we got around the irritating bits of Hugo. I think you're going to find with any static site generator, it's just going to be things that you're like, well, we got to get around this. Here are Hugo's nastier bits. If you're going to come from a different Markdown parser like Cramdown to Black Friday, it's a big sentence, then these are the things that are going to trip you up. And they're the things that we saw that were the big problems. Again, it was really nice to have somebody like Bjorn Erik Pedersen who wrote Hugo and knew how to get around a lot of these issues and could help us fix them. So definitely having help if you're planning a migration is a great idea. I think the knowledge of Hugo and the general acceptance of it as a standard tool is growing. I know Green is working on our public documentation, moving it from a weird generated Swagger Hub-ish document to Hugo. That's an effort that's in progress. So I think we're only going to see more of Hugo in the future. Which brings me to the next thing, which is internationalization. As I investigated, I was like, okay, docs internationalization, this is a really big topic. I kind of saw that there were two things that were really important that I noticed to get right with internationalization. And that was internationalization in the community, which are the people who are actually doing the internationalizing or localization. And then there was the code itself and actually implementing the internationalization. So I'll start with the less technical bit first and then move on to the actual technical implementation, which is internationalization in the community. That is a very sweaty photo of me in Korea. I decided to take a weekend trip to go see some of our contributors. That is Junyi and Claudia. They are awesome. Our Korean translators have been like family to me. They have been some of the most lovely and receptive people. So basically with a tool as fast-moving and ubiquitous and global as Kubernetes, we found that we get to meet interesting people around the world all the time. Lots of people are very interested in helping you do like the first page, and then that's it. With open source and volunteer-based efforts, generally if a company is not sponsoring an individual to do something, it's always best effort. Like, I'm a volunteer. I can generally only do one night a week of actually like really looking at PRs and really working on these things. And I can attend the SIG meetings for an hour and say like, yeah, I agree with that, but I can't do anything. So that's like super helpful if in the internationalization journey, if you're able to sponsor people who can help you take the Markdown content from one place to another, that's extreme. We've seen like, for example, Red Hat in Korea and what was the other place? Samsung SDS. They have been extremely instrumental in Asia Pacific for Kubernetes to be able to localize and internationalize our docs. They have dedicated people. They also have people who volunteer, which has been really helpful. As a SIG, we have reorganized our meeting structure. So one meeting a week, I'm missing it right now. On Tuesdays, we go at 7 p.m. on the 4th Tuesday of the month, because Asia Pacific, that's early in their morning on Wednesday. So we've, as a SIG, we've like re-architected our meeting structure so that we can better serve the needs of some of the people that we can't meet when it's convenient for them. Because for example, like when I go and meet with some of the team that I work with at Y-Green who live in Bangalore, then I'm like, hey, let's have a meeting at 10 a.m. and not thinking about it. It's like, that's 10:30 p.m. their time. So in internationalization efforts, when you want to synchronize, always being respectful of time zones, it goes so much further than you could possibly imagine. I think people are generally used to, this is definitely an overgeneralization, but in my case, I have seen that people are more used to kind of dealing with America's time zones. So when every now and again you say, okay, like let's inconvenience ourselves and say like something that's really convenient for you, it goes a long way. And then we aggressively fight for openness and inclusion in SIG-Docs. Like I said, we have teams from almost every continent except Antarctica right now who are internationalizing our docs in some form or fashion. So trying to be as open and respectful as we can to people's questions, to their comments, to their ideas, has been really, really helpful in the internationalization effort for us. Because the fact of the matter is, like, I grew up in various parts of this country, but I still grew up very much so in America. And so I have inbuilt biases that I don't know of, that when I meet with people in other cultures, you know, I might clear my throat in a way or do something that's like extremely offensive and I don't know it. So staying humble and being open to people's feedback and trying to come in as low as possible to serve, because they're helping you internationalize your docs. So you might as well go the extra mile for them. And then let's go to the technical bit, which is actually doing the code, which is the sticky bits in Hugo. So in Hugo, there is a /content/** for every language that you want to support. It is the country code. So for example, Chinese simplified is ZH, Japanese is JA, Korean KO, Norwegian or Norse NO. That list is freely available somewhere else, and it is not in my head. So the most complicated part for us as a community was the branching strategy. Do we have any Git geniuses in here? Oh, you thought you were about to raise your hand. Okay. So neither am I, by the way. But we have tried about 6 different ways to manage our Git-ness with respect to how we do documentation. Because one, I will say this openly, and anybody on the internet can enjoy this, we are the black sheep of the Kubernetes community as it pertains to how we manage our repository. Everybody else, master is the source of truth, and then when it comes time to the release, a release branch is cut and PRs are cherry-picked into that branch as they are available, or sorry, commits are cherry-picked into that branch, and then eventually a git tag is added and that becomes the release, and RPMs and debs and all that good stuff are created. We don't have that luxury in docs because, as I said, we have the largest and broadest contributor base of any particular SIG inside of Kubernetes. So what we have to do is, for the people who are doing drive-by PRs who fixed, like, they added an S to a term that needed to be pluralized, and that was it. And they signed the CNCF CLA, Contributor License Agreement, then that's a valid PR, and it definitely deserves to be in, but is that something that has to be held up by a release? I would think not. So we don't do that. Master for us is production. I was going to try to come up with a diagram, but after about 3 or 4 branches, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so complicated. Master is production. And then we have a release branch that we cut at the beginning of a release as opposed to at the end. And then people open PRs against that particular branch when they want the documentation to go live with the release. If it's something that can go live whenever, it just goes to master. And then, of course, we have branches that go off further from it of different backed versions. So, you know, we have a 113 branch, a 112 branch, a 111 branch, a 110 branch. And you can go check all this out at github.com/Kubernetes/website. With that branching strategy, it adds a fair bit of complexity because I don't know if you guys know this, but merging in Git creates a brand new commit with all the code that you merged if you don't rebase and instead just add all the commits one at a time. So generally it's accepted wisdom that you never rebase on a public branch. Well, we haven't had that luxury at certain times, and so we get very, very frustrated engineers letting us know that our Git skills are very atrocious when we have to rebase a public branch because we need your commit to be on top of what's on master and not something else. Because master continues to have new commits that the release branch won't. So synchronizing that and then doing that for times 5 languages and now 6 coming here soon, you can imagine it's very, very messy in there and very scary. So this is the way that we've come up with. This has probably been like the only real, what I feel like was somewhat larger achievement I was able to help contribute to, which was we originally had separate forked repositories of the Hugo code base and one for each language. And that was how we were going to manage it. You merge your own PRs and your own thing so you can have your own ownership, right? Because it would be senseless for me to review a Korean docs PR. I've been assigned a few, and I'm sort of, every single time I'm like, it looks good to me, I think. It seems like you spelled everything correctly. I've even tried putting one in Google Translate. It just doesn't work. So what we've had to do is we have this tool that's been given to us. Do you remember Prow, or was that in when you were in there? Okay. There's this tool that manages everything. I'm going to fast forward to it. Oh, there it is. Called Prow. And this thing is responsible for merging PRs. It's a robot. Merging PRs and adding labels and checking stuff and doing things. And it's in Kubernetes test infra. It's open source. You can take it. Good luck configuring it. I tried once for Y-Green. I was like, no. It's definitely very specific to the Kubernetes community. But basically, the way that Prow works is when someone opens a pull request, it looks through all of the Git tree for something called an owners file. And the owners file has a list of GitHub usernames who are responsible for approving pull requests in that repository, which is really nice because then any one of those 4 people can say, yep, that looks good to me, and you can move on with your day. Then nobody has to have write access to the repository, and it's not a mess when you're like, okay, who force pushed this particular commit? This just screwed up everything for everybody. So Prow has been really helpful, but it's been really irritating with internationalization because we originally had a list a mile long of every single possible approver that we would have in our group. The problem is somebody who speaks only English like me well, poquito Espanol, but not really enough to be useful, basically cannot review any other language and yet would be assigned to it. So having separate repositories was great and it solved the prow problem, but it didn't solve the Git branching problem. Because now, you just saw our messy master and releases. That times 5 equals at least 50 branches that a release meister needs to be aware of to perform an internationalized Kubernetes docs release. That is a nightmare, a literal nightmare. We actually ended up coming up with something nifty. I wrote this. You can find it in my GitHub thing. It's a Kubernetes Internationalization doc spot. It eventually got moved into Prow. But the way it works is, and you guys can totally use this thing of yourselves. Like, I don't have the URL. I apologize. I'll find a way to get it to you guys. But the way that this thing works is it's just a simple little AWS Lambda function. It parses through understanding Hugo's syntax for where the files changed, and it basically performs a simple average. Where did the most files changing occur? If it occurred mostly in the content/ZH directory, then somebody who is a Chinese language reviewer would be best equipped to be able to review this pull request. If most of it came in the content/ES directory, somebody who speaks Spanish is going to be best equipped to be able to do this. And if files changed in both of them, then whichever one had more changes is going to be the one that's more equipped to do it. And that's basically all it does. It's very simple. When we adopted this and we were able to move everybody into the same repository, because that was part of our problem, is we have 10,000 pull requests right now. Which is another literal nightmare to deal with as a release manager, because you have 200 inbound pull requests for a release, and then all these other pull requests of people doing drive-by spell check errors. That times the number of languages of PRs is 1,000 PRs in a release cycle, which is 3 months long, which would drive somebody insane. So to combat this, we use label selection. So this was an example label selection. I filtered for is PR is open, and then language/EN. So using this label filtering, actually it was super simple, the solution, so I'm not really all that excited to present about it. Using labels solved everything. So now everybody's in the same repository, but a reviewer only sees stuff that's relevant to them. And Prow only assigns people that are supposed to be assigned and can approve those specific docs. So I can't, sorry, I hit the mic. I can't approve a pull request in the content/ZH directory, nor should I. And similarly, somebody who speaks Korean can't approve something that is language/EN and assigned to somebody in that group, which is good. So that's been the way that we've solved it. I definitely would encourage you, if you are able to investigate what's going on in Kubernetes /website. All of that is extremely well documented, but that was the stickier bit, that when we figured that piece out, everything got along a lot better in terms of how we managed internationalized docs, because now the inbound volume of requests is basically where we were at 6 months ago before we really started this internationalization effort. Hugo's config.toml, strings and folders. Okay, so I explained the folders. There's also another feature of Hugo that has come out recently called internationalized strings. I wish I had grabbed a screenshot of this. It's basically a file that sits in the root of your repository that has a list of all of your strings and then a canonical name for that string. And anywhere it appears inside of the Markdown, it's replaced with the internationalized version of that string. That's a project that's in progress right now with Bjorn Erik Pedersen. I claim no knowledge of that project or how it's going. I imagine it's going well. That will definitely complicate approval and pull request nonsense for us. So if you see my hair lying on the ground later, that's why. The final thing is Hugo's config.toml. The last thing that we really screwed up with Hugo's internationalization effort was how we managed everything that you see that Hugo does comes in its config.toml file. Toml is essentially like a YAML file. It's a configuration language. And inside of it, you'll find a lot of the ability to configure languages. There is actually I would just say copy the one that we have, because we went through the annoying stuff. I don't remember what it was, I'm so sorry. But Hugo's config.toml, if you want to internationalize, that's what it was. With the way that we did things, Kubernetes.io is the English language website, but we also have .cn, .ko, something else. But basically .extension. That was, we figured out later, how we were able to handle the configuration in the config.toml of, if somebody comes to this website, by default they should be seeing this language's documentation. Because there is no way, if you look on a website, to select something else. By default, everything comes as English, and then if it has an internationalized version of that file, it will display that over top of it. If it has the top-level domain like kubernetes.cn, it will display English, and if it has Chinese, Chinese. As far as I know, I think that's everything I have. So do you guys have questions? Sorry if that was just like a brain drain. Yes?
In the internationalization, do you make a difference between UK English and American English? UK over there.
Right. You know what? We don't. To my knowledge, we do not. Content/EN, we don't do a -US or -GB for Great Britain. We've noticed that if somebody were, like, if we would have done internationalization with a Z and someone does it with an S, it's not really something that we're going to sweat a lot about. Generally, English is understandable by people, even if it's we actually, that's a good point. I'm going to write that down so that I don't forget about that. Maybe we should. Love it. You guys are helping me learn. It's a good point. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Because with translation, depending on what kind of translation engine you're using, as well as certain things have already been programmed to recognize, let's say, the word behavior without the U.
Right.
And if they're focusing on that and they don't notice that that one has a U, it might miss the translation engine, which means that will get popped off as not being translated, depending on whether it's going into Russian or Chinese or whatever.
Right. To my knowledge, maybe you can help me understand what you mean by translation engine. We don't automatically generate anything in terms of other languages. We only use human translators, because one, Kubernetes, Google Translate has had some historically hilarious fails when it translates into other languages. If you try adding the fact that this is an extremely technical project with very confusing words in the middle of sentences, like configure the pod, and someone's like, configure the what? So, and put it inside of the replication controller and put that in a deployment, and then that deployment is going to go out into, so we've just basically kind of said, if something's going to be translated, it's got to be done by a human and approved by somebody else that speaks that language fluently. I think you had a question, yes?
Yeah, how did you pick the theme and did you customize it?
It was a completely custom theme made by Bjorn Erik Pedersen that matched the style of the previous documentation website, which I believe was made by a designer in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So, steal it from our website. Everything is Apache 2 licensed, so should be AO great. If you want to contribute to and fix some stuff, we would love that. I mean, I've done CSS changes, and I've been like, okay, I hope this works. I think that was my first contribution, was like a CSS change that was going to affect the whole website. And I was like, well, I checked it on one page, and it looks good, so let's go ahead and ship it. Any other questions? How did we do on time? 7:59, come on. That was pretty good. Okay, well, obviously you guys have that phone number. I will put it back up. If you have questions later, just text me. I have no problem answering questions about docs or Kubernetes or anything. I sincerely appreciate your time. Thank you so much for letting me come and speak. And yeah, hope you guys have a great night.